Hello and welcome to Strategic News International. I am Surya Gangadharan. Today, Israel marks its 71st anniversary of independence. And I have with me Professor David Newman. He is a professor of geopolitics and political geography at David Ben Gurion University in Israel. He is also, most interesting, a visiting professor at Delhi's South Asian University. So he straddles both worlds very comfortably. And he is originally from England.
That's correct.
And you can make that out by his accent. Professor Newman, 71st anniversary of independence and all that. We have some leaked reports of the Jared Kushner plan for a new Palestine. Now, nobody is very sure whether this thing is actually genuine or not. What's your view on that?
Well, as you say, there's a lot of rumors, there's a lot of leaked reports, but no one really knows what this plan contains. There does seem to be very strong evidence to suggest that within the next few months, the Trump administration is going to put something on the table in front of Israel and the Palestinians, but we really don't know what the content is, beyond the fact that it would appear to offer the Palestinians a lot less than past peace plans have offered. But we're all waiting to see what it will contain in terms of Israeli territorial withdrawal, the issue of the settlements, the issue of full sovereignty or autonomy. All of these are question marks at the present.
You think the Palestinians are in any mood to accept a plan of this kind?
My gut feeling is to say no, because the Palestinians have also, in a sense, said no to much better plans, again, as I say, based on the rumors. And this could be, Israel's way of moving out of it, because Netanyahu, of course, is the head of a right-wing and quite a strongly right-wing government, and he's going to have a lot of people in his own government who are going to be opposed to whatever the plan is. But it doesn't seem to us, as I say, from the leaks or the rumors that we've heard, it doesn't seem to us that it's going to be something which is acceptable to the Palestinians at the present stage.
So if the Palestinians refuse, as we expect they will, it means the end of all Western aid.
Well, you never know with the Trump administration. I think the one thing you can say with certainty about President Trump is that you never know what's going to happen. But there have been those threats out there, and of course that's a very serious threat. The difference between the Trump administration and past administrations is that he often means these things when he says them, and he has of course carried out or implemented certain policies and policy statements with respect to Israel-Palestine in the last 2 years, which are very far-reaching and which are very different to previous administrations.
I find it strange that Israel and the Palestinians nearly went to war a couple of days ago.
It's not the first time. As you know, I myself live in the south of the country, and when there are rockets from the Gaza Strip, I also hear them, and I also get the siren warnings, and sometimes have to go into the shelters to make sure that we're not hit. For 6 years, I was dean of my university, and about 4 or 5 years ago in the summer, there was a war between Israel and the Gaza Strip, a mini-war, and we had to shut the university down. And this week as well, the university and the schools and the kindergartens and public places were shut down for 2 days for fear of a stray rocket hitting one of these things. And for many of us, we thought there was going to be a major escalation. But they somehow managed to come to a temporary ceasefire for the moment, and we hope that that will last. But we can never be guaranteed that, because every 2 or 3 years it seems to flare up again.
Would you say that the Netanyahu administration under the Netanyahu administration, there's been less and less chances of peace with the Arabs?
I think it's fair to say that we're talking peace a lot less today than we were 10 years ago. There's no question about that. Neither Netanyahu or Abu Mazen have a great deal of communication between them. There are no bilateral talks going on. Even at the level of track 2, there's a lot less than there used to be 10 years ago. So the situation is, in one sense, worse. They're not sitting around the table. And it would appear to us that you do need the reintroduction of some strong third-party intervention to get the talks going again. But that third-party intervention has to be someone who is seen as being an honest broker by both sides. And although the Americans have the greatest ability to deliver, they are, of course, much more friendly with the Israel side than with the Palestinian side. And it's not clear whether Palestinians would see them or accept them as being that third-party honest broker.
Now, you've been quoted as saying that perhaps even India could get involved in something like this kind. Was that serious?
I made that as a closing comment at the lecture I gave the other day. But having said that, you mustn't forget that Israel has a very strong and good relationship with India today, as do the Palestinians and the various Arab countries. And there is a need for more third-party intervention, for new ideas. And it wouldn't be beyond the realms of the imagination to see India taking on some role in this process.
So you would, have you received any feedback or any indications that...
Well, the lecture was only 2 days ago, and I think it's only just been posted, so I don't think many people have seen it yet. But having said that, of course, whoever was to get involved as third party, I mean, whether it's the Europeans who are sometimes more involved and sometimes less involved, or India or other countries, they would only ever be in a strong, let's say, supporting role. Yeah. I think the United States are always going to be the major one, and they don't want anyone else to really take over their role as the major power broker and player in the Middle East.
Just to get back to Israeli politics, Israel is pretty right-wing right now, isn't it? I mean, it's been pushing the right-wing fringe for quite some time.
Well, Netanyahu's been prime minister now for 10 years. Another few weeks he'll be the longest-serving prime minister in Israel's history, longer than David Gurion, the famous state founder. And Netanyahu, of course, is head of the right-wing Likud party, which leads the Likud coalition in the government. And over the past 10 years, I think what you've seen in public opinion in Israel, ever since the unilateral evacuation or withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, you've seen Israeli public opinion move from the left into the center and the center into the right. So that there is no real coalition. You need 61 seats, to have a minimum of 61 to have a coalition government in Israel. There is no left of center coalition which could create a government today. There is a centrist right, or there's a right-wing right, which is what Netanyahu is today, because Netanyahu has some very extreme right-wing parties as his partners in this new government coalition.
How would you describe the mood of the average Israeli voter? Is it conditioned by fear of what could happen if Netanyahu is not there? Is it concerned about the Arabs, and what is it?
Well, Mr. Netanyahu has very successfully sold himself both as Mr. Security and as Mr. Foreign Affairs. He's actually, as Prime Minister at different times during his tenure, he has also been Defense Minister, and for a long time the Foreign Minister. He sees himself as a world diplomat, and he has done a number of things on the world scene, which particularly with respect to Asia, which no previous Prime Ministers have done. And as far as the agenda of the Israeli, particularly the Israeli Jewish public, which is 80% of the population, are concerned, security is the number one issue, whether it's mentioned a lot or not in the actual election campaign. And it wasn't a big issue in this year's elections, but nevertheless, security is on the table. And Netanyahu very successfully sells himself as Mr. Security, hardline security against all forms of terrorism and violence, even when the opposing parties are headed by former commanders-in-chief who are generally accepted as being in the know about security. So that's clearly a major issue on the political agenda of all of Israel whenever there are elections.
But would you say that Israel is safer today than ever before, given the fact that even countries like Saudi Arabia are reaching out to Israel? There's some kind of a dialogue going on?
There does seem to be dialogue going on between Israel and some of the Gulf states, but I wouldn't say Israel is safer. I think probably 10 years ago it was safer. It didn't have missiles coming in from South Lebanon. It didn't have missiles coming in from the Gaza Strip. And it didn't have what is perceived, or at least is presented as, a major regional threat in the sense of Iran. So many would argue actually that Israel's security position is more questionable than it was 10 years ago. Having said that, Israel clearly has military superiority, particularly in the sophisticated technology, the anti-missile technology. Israel is always up there in the forefront. So Israel is not going to suddenly disappear into the sea. It doesn't face an existential threat, but there are localized security concerns today which didn't exist 10 years ago.
So you believe the threat from Iran is even greater today than ever before?
I don't know enough about it to say, because obviously there's a lot of misinformation going around about what Iran's real nuclear capability is. But certainly, ever since Egypt was taken out of the regional situation through the Israel-Egypt peace agreement at the end of the early 1980s, the end of 70s, early 80s, there was always the feeling in Israel, okay, there are localized security issues, but the existential threat has disappeared. There is the feeling amongst some Israelis in the street today that if Iran does have or would gain a nuclear potential, then that existential threat facing the country could return. And a lot of Israelis are very worried about that.
So is that what is dictating your policies in Syria?
Well, of course, Iran is now involved, not just from Iran. Iran is involved in Syria, Iran is involved in Lebanon, but then again, so too is Russia, and Israel has a very good relationship with Russia. And it would appear that a lot of what happens today between Syria and Israel is to a large extent dictated to what is agreed between Netanyahu and Putin as to where Russia will draw the lines in what's going on in Syria. So the whole regional complex has changed very significantly, particularly in the last few years, as some of the Arab states, particularly Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, have undergone this internal fragmentation.
So as what we see today is a coalition of Sunni states and a coalition of Shia states. And Israel seems to be firmly with the Sunni.
With the Sunni, but obviously not with the ISIS, which are also Sunni, they're not Shia. But clearly, what is going on, a lot of it under the table between Israel and the Gulf states, is not necessarily out of a love for each other, but it's because they both see ISIS and the jihad and the organizations like that as a common threat, as a much bigger threat. Plus the fact that some of the Gulf states have expressed their dissatisfaction at what is going on within the Palestinian world, particularly amongst the Hamas world, and they're not blindly supportive of the Palestinians as they were in the past.
Are Israel and the US coordinating policies on Iran? Because
I'm not an insider, so I couldn't tell you that. I would have thought there must be a lot going on because Israel and the US have an extremely close relationship today. I mean, they had a pretty poor relationship under Obama. Netanyahu and Obama didn't get on. That doesn't mean to say there was any danger of the United States not being Israel's major strategic ally. But they didn't see eye to eye on many issues. With Trump and his son-in-law and the new ambassador, they're very close to each other. They obviously discuss a lot of stuff behind the scenes. And of course, Trump has given Israel, or it's given Mr. Netanyahu, some very major presents in the past 2 years, such as moving his embassy to Jerusalem, such as making statements about Israel's claim to sovereignty over the Golan Heights. So there's a very close relationship between the two today.
in your own view, is this understanding with the Saudis and others, is it a temporary thing? It could come apart at any point?
I assume it could come apart. It doesn't seem to at the moment. Israel has developed its international relations beyond North America and beyond Europe in the last 10 years, both with the Gulf states and with much of Asia, with Japan, South Korea, India, and China. Israel has expanded its international relations on matters of mutual interest and mutual concern. And for as long as the various Islamic threats continue to be seen by some states in the Middle East as potentially destabilizing, it would appear to me that those relationships between Israel and the Saudis will go on, but no one can take for granted that that will be forever.
Some of the speculation in India is that with the Saudis and Israel on one side, it may not be long before even Pakistan gets into this.
There's only so far that the Arab states of the Gulf with the Saudis can do things with Israel for as long as the Israel-Palestine conflict is not resolved. Even if there's dissatisfaction amongst them about what is going on in the Palestinian Authority, there's only so far they can go without losing the support of much of the Arab world, which of course is very important to them. Pakistan, as a Muslim state, obviously has a great interest in what's going on in the region. Of course, they could become more involved again because Pakistan too is a nuclear power, a proven nuclear power as opposed to Iran, and that of course could provide a threat. So Israel wouldn't want to see Pakistan getting over involved in what goes on in the region.
But they are similar states when you look at them, both heavily militarized, both with a strong religious component.
Yes, but I think they're far more different than they are similar. You say a strong military component. I mean, Israel obviously has an extremely strong army, extremely strong security services, but you don't feel that it's a military state as such when you move around. There are powerful religious parties in Israel, but they still represent a minority. It's true that in this new government, the ultra-religious parties are going to have a very strong role because they have no less than 16 seats. So they are going to be together, two parties, a major coalition partner of Netanyahu. So religion's secular relations is a major issue on the national agenda the whole time, but I don't think it plays the same forceful role that it does in Pakistan.
I want to talk about Israel and China. You know, there's been a lot of coverage about China investing in Israeli ports and high-tech companies. Where is this going?
Well, as I say, what the Netanyahu government has done, I think quite successfully in the past 10 years, it has really expanded its relationships with the whole of Asia, with that part of Asia which it's ready to talk to, with India, where there's extremely strong relations today, with China, with South Korea, with Japan, and with the exception of perhaps India, a lot of this is to do with high tech, with trade, and not necessarily military and defense relationships, although that's there as well, as you well know, in India. So it's going places, and Israel sees China and India as a very important future partner in many areas of relationship.
Is Israel joining the Belt and Road initiative?
Not to the best of my knowledge, but I don't have any information on that.
Maybe not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, I'd like to look at India and Israel. Any thoughts there?
As I say, I have been here for 4 months as a visiting scholar professor at SAU and met many Indian scholars and research students. And I think our discussion about India and Israel has only got to the point where we say, you know, Israel and India probably have stronger relations today than they've ever had in the past. In the first period of Israel's history, then there were reasonable relationships built, I would more say, on the development of agriculture and peripheral regions. Then there was a period where relations were cut off. And in the last, less than 20 years, they've redeveloped, they've reformulated in a very strong way. Israel's second largest embassy in the world is in India after the United States, which says a lot about the nature of the relationship. Netanyahu has been here, is it once or twice, to visit Modi. And Netanyahu has a unique situation in the world where he has a strong relationship with Trump, with Putin, and with Modi. And, you know, lots of backroom negotiations and networking goes on in that sort of situation. And I can see that Israel and India are only going to strengthen those relationships in the immediate future.
I mean, when we talk of the Israeli relationship, it seems heavily predicated on the military thing, you know.
Today, there's no question. That is a big issue. I mean, you have most of the Israeli military developers are involved in contracts with, I assume, the Indian government and the military establishment. That is a big issue, but there are many other areas in terms of development, in terms of rural areas, agricultural development, in which there's a great deal of expertise and know-how in Israel, which is being exported to India. There are a lot of Indian research students who are coming to Israeli universities and research centers to learn about desert development and agricultural development. So while the military is a strong issue today, it is by no means the only issue.
And any thoughts on Netanyahu visit? I understand there was a plan to come here earlier in the year.
I'm not privy to Mr. Netanyahu's plans, but I would not be surprised that once he gets his new coalition government together and he sets up an agenda for the next few years, I would not be surprised if a major visit to India would be on that agenda.
Professor Newman, on that note, pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.